Well, since the first three recipients have spoken for the open source movement, I think I should speak about the free software movement. The open source movement focuses on practical advantages that you can get by having a community of users who can cooperate on interchanging and improving software. I agree completely with the points they make about that. The reason why my views are different, why I am in the free software movement rather than the open source movement, is that I believe there's something more important at stake. That freedom to cooperate with other people, freedom to have a community is important for our quality of life. It's important for having a good society that we can live in. And that is, in my view, even more important than having powerful and reliable software.
But I think some of the people in the free software camp are a little scared by the commercialization. And, you know, of course, a rebel is put off by success. I think that commercialization is very important. We want to mainstream this software. And I work with Richard Stallman, who's the gray-haired man of free software, on a regular basis, and I don't feel I have any philosophical differences. Me as author of the open source definition, and he is originator of free software as an organized thing, except for one thing. Richard wants all software to be free, and I think that free software and non-free software should coexist. That's the only difference we have.
We decided early on that what we needed a definition. We needed a kind of meta license to define the term open source. And what we came up with is a document called the Open Source Definition. It's derived from the Debian Free Software Guidelines that were originally written by Bruce Perens.
I had written the original draft of that, discussed it for a month with the Debian developers. Debian is a Linux distribution, and made it their project policy. And Eric and I decided to relabel what we'd written for Debian as the open source definition, and to say open source is software that gives you a list of 9 rights, which is in the open source definition. The first right is free redistribution. This doesn't mean free as in no price, it means liberty. You have to be free to redistribute your software to someone else, and actually no price is a side effect. You can charge for that redistribution or not. It has to come with source code so that someone can maintain a program. If they go from a PC to a Mac, for example, they can change the software. Derived works have to be possible. If someone has to improve your program, they should be able to distribute the result. There's a provision about integrity of the author's source code, which says that the author can sort of maintain their honor, and if you make a change, you might have to change the name of the program or mark out your change very clearly so that your change doesn't reflect on the author. There's no discrimination against people or groups. The example I usually use is you can't stop an abortion clinic or an anti-abortion activist from using the software. There's no discrimination against fields of endeavor, and that means the software has to be usable in a business as well as in a school. The license has to be distributable. In other words, I have to be able to give that license to someone, and that license then should work if that someone gives it to yet a third person. The license can't be specific to a product. In other words, if I distribute my software on a Red Hat system, the license can't say you can't distribute this on a SUSE or a Debian system. The license can't contaminate other software. So if I distribute this on a CD with another program, it can't say that other program must be free, otherwise you can't distribute my software. And then the only other part of the open source definition is a list of licenses that were accepted. And the ones that we started with were the GPL, which was actually the example for a lot of what's in the open source definition, the BSD license, because software for BSD system pre-existed Linux.
I think the next moment that I thought was really pivotal was when the database vendors flipped over, which happened about 3 months sooner than I expected it to. It actually happened in late July, early August. That we got commitments to do Tier 1 ports from Oracle and Sybase and the other key database vendors.
And why was that critical?
Because we knew that in order for the open source story to be credible, and especially in order for the Linux story to be credible, we'd have to get commitments from independent software vendors to do ports of their applications to these platforms. And I was actually kind of worried. I felt that we were in a window of vulnerability between the time that we announced the open source campaign and the database vendors flipped over. That was the point at which hostile action by Microsoft or other closed source software companies, that was the point at which a serious marketing blitz might actually have sunk us. But once the big database vendors flipped over, that opened the way for other ISVs. That started a snowball effect going.
Every 6 months or so, I would come back to the venture capitalists, and I would show them the new numbers, showing more and more people adopting Linux, the new people porting, new users, and I'd show them our customer list. And our customer list was getting much more impressive. It was people like Cisco that were beginning to appear. People like the .com companies were starting to show up on our customer list. And eventually the venture capitalists, they kept looking at it and they kept saying, oh, we can't quite do it. Finally, Linus appeared on the cover of Fortune because there was something happening with open source. Well, at that point, the venture capitalists couldn't ignore it. They just got sick of hearing about Linux everywhere, and they got tired of me just showing it to them every at that point almost every week. So they decided it was time to invest. That there was something happening.
Well, I announced open source to the world on the internet. I did a lot of the early administrative work of starting the open source initiative. And I think 6 months later, I was reading the words open source in the news all the time and was totally astounded. And a year later, I believe Microsoft was talking about releasing some source code. And someone in the press asked Steve Ballmer if they were going to open source their code, and Steve Ballmer said, well, open source means more than just releasing the source code. And I realized that he had read my document and understood it and was now telling the press about this. Now, if you're like just a guy on the net who's not doing this for a job at all, and you sort of write a manifesto and it spreads out through the world, and a year later the vice president of Microsoft is talking about that, you'd think you were on drugs, wouldn't you? But that's what really happened.